If you're a farmer or you live in a farming community, let me ask you a question. Have you looked at the sticker shock on a new piece of farm machinery lately? It's not just your imagination. That feeling in your gut is real. According to data from the USDA and various farm journals, the price of new and even used farm equipment has skyrocketed over the last few years. We're talking 30, 40, sometimes 50% increases. It's a cost that makes it harder to plant, harder to harvest, and harder to make a living. But here is the bitter irony. This is all happening at the exact same time we were promised an American manufacturing renaissance. We were told that tough trade policies, the tariffs, the trade war, was all designed to bring American jobs back to American shores. It was supposed to protect icons, companies that are woven into the very fabric of this country, companies like John Deere. But here is the hard, cold fact, the fact that isn't being discussed enough on the nightly news. John Deere isn't just adding jobs in America. In some of its most critical areas, it is moving them. And it's not moving them to Asia or some far-flung continent. It's moving them just south of the border, to Mexico. This is the story of the hometown hit. It's the story of why this is happening. And the answer is not what you think. This isn't the old simple story of cheap labor. This is a new complex story about a strategic defensive decision. It's a story about a company running for cover, a company fleeing from an invisible threat, a threat more dangerous to its business than high taxes or high wages. The threat of policy uncertainty, the why. The real enemy is uncertainty. Now, when a story like this breaks, the immediate default answer from just about everyone is cheap labor. And we're not going to sit here and tell you labor costs don't matter. They do. But that is a lazy, incomplete explanation for what is happening right now. It's the 1990s answer to a 2025 problem. If you want to understand the real reason, the reason a board of directors at a 180-year-old American company decides to uproot a critical production line, you have to stop thinking about cost and start thinking about risk. The real enemy, the true villain of this story, is uncertainty. Here is a fundamental truth of modern global business. A CEO, a supply chain manager, a factory planner, they can build a 5-year plan around a high cost as long as it's stable. You can engineer for it. You can budget for it. You can negotiate for it. What you cannot do, what is impossible to plan for, is chaos. You cannot build a billion-dollar supply chain around a policy that can be changed, reversed, or invented with an overnight shock. And chaos is the only word to describe the trade policy environment of the last few years. Let's deconstruct this policy whiplash. Imagine you are John Deere, sitting in Moline, Illinois. You are trying to build a tractor. Suddenly, the trade war begins. The first hit comes, the input shock. A 25% tariff is slapped on imported steel. For a company like John Deere, steel isn't just a component. It is the lifeblood of every single product they make. It's the frame, the body, the engine block, the loader. Your foundational cost, the bedrock of your entire business, didn't just go up, it exploded, and it became unpredictable. Domestic steel mills, now shielded from competition, raised their prices to match. The protective tariff ended up just being a massive, unavoidable tax on the American manufacturer. But that was just the beginning. Then came the supply chain shock. This was the death by 1,000 cuts. The headlines were all about steel. But the policy also hit thousands of small, unsexy, but absolutely critical components. The microchips, the wiring harnesses, the hydraulic valves, the GPS components. A $500,000 combine harvester can be brought to a dead stop for one of a $5 electronic part that is now stuck in port or has doubled in price. This is the instability, Site 1318, that executives talk about. The supply chain, once a finely tuned machine, was now a daily gamble. But the third hit, this was the most brutal of all, the retaliation shock. As the U.S. applied tariffs, other countries, especially China, retaliated. And what did they target? They targeted the heart of the American economy, They targeted soybeans. Site 01090711. They targeted pork. They targeted corn. This was the double whammy. This was the blow that turned a crisis into an impossible situation. Think about this. Washington's policies were hitting John Deere from three directions at once. 1. The input shock made the cost of building a tractor, steel, go up. 2. The supply chain shock made the cost of all the other parts, electronics, go up. And 3. The retaliation shock on soybeans attacked the income of John Deere's primary customer, the American farmer. Your costs are exploding at the exact same moment your customer's wallet is shrinking. This is not a sustainable business. This is a trap. You cannot plan. You cannot invest. You cannot hire. All you can do is look for an escape. The how, the rational escape, the USMCA safe harbor. So why Mexico? Why not move production back to the US? Why not reshore? Because this isn't the 1990s. This isn't outsourcing to Asia to find the cheapest possible labor. This is nearshoring for survival. And the answer can be found in 3 letters. USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. This agreement, the replacement for NAFTA, creates one of the largest, most stable, and most powerful trading blocs on the planet. It was, ironically, one of the signature achievements of the very administration that was also waging the chaotic global trade war. And in doing so, it created a safe harbor. Here is how it works in the simplest terms. Think of the USMCA as a giant economic fortress. Inside the walls of this fortress, between the US, Canada, and Mexico, goods can mostly move freely, predictably, and without those massive punitive tariffs. Outside the fortress is the chaos, the trade war with China, the whiplash tariffs on India, the steel tariffs on Europe. By moving a production line from Iowa to Mexico, John Deere was not fleeing America in the way we traditionally think. They were strategically repositioning their assets inside the fortress walls. They were building a shock absorber. A cabin built in the New Mexico plant can be trucked to the border and imported into the United States without the 25% steel tariff. It can be built with components sourced from within the North American bloc, shielding it from the China tariffs. It creates a stable, predictable, and tariff-free environment. It creates certainty. This is not a traitorous or unpatriotic decision. From a boardroom perspective, it is the only rational, defensive, and logical decision you can make. It is a move to protect the entire company from the instability and unpredictability of its own government's policy. John Deere was running away from the chaos in Washington and taking refuge in the stability of a treaty that Washington itself had signed. That is the profound and tragic irony of the hometown hit, the ripple effect, the community impact. But this is where the story moves from a Bloomberg spreadsheet to the kitchen table. A rational, defensive decision in an Illinois boardroom is a devastating emotional and economic blow to a small town in America. This is the ripple effect. And to understand it, we have to look at the town that took the hit. We have to look at Ottumwa, Iowa. The John Deere Ottumwa Works plant has been the heart of that community for over 70 years. It's not just a factory, it is the factory. It's the kind of place where your father worked and your grandfather worked. It's the kind of place that built the American middle class. So when that company, John Deere, confirmed it was moving its cab production, the core of its operation, from Ottumwa to Mexico, it wasn't just a news story, it was a betrayal. Let's trace the ripple of that single decision. The first impact, the one you read about in the paper, is the direct jobs. We're talking about hundreds of UAW, United Auto Workers jobs. But we need to understand what a UAW backbone job truly means to a community. This is not a minimum wage part-time service gig. This is a career. It's a 30-an-hour plus benefits job. It's the job that lets you buy a home, not just rent. It's the job that lets you own a boat, take a family vacation, send your kids to college. It is the foundation of the entire town's middle class. When you pull 200 or 300 of those foundational jobs out of a town like Ottumwa, the entire structure starts to crack. That leads to the second impact, the indirect ecosystem. Those 300 UAW workers, they bought coffee every morning at the local diner. They bought steel-toed boots from the local workwear store. They bought parts for their trucks from the local auto shop. They paid local property taxes. The factory itself, it had contracts with local machine shops, local cleaning crews, local shipping, and logistics companies. When the production leaves, that entire local ecosystem, the hometown ripple, begins to dry up. The diner lays off a waitress. The hardware store cuts back on hours. The hometown hit is never just one hit, it's a wave. And that brings us to the third impact, the farming ripple effect. This is the most painful irony of all. We connect back to that farmer from the beginning, the one suffering from sticker shock, the very policy, the trade war, that was supposed to help the American farmer by getting tough, ended up hurting the American farmer. It hurt them twice. First, as we saw, it ignited a retaliation war that crushed their soybean exports and shrank their income. And second, it created the very instability that forced John Deere to move, which in turn raises the long-term cost and complexity of the very machines they need to survive. The farmer in Iowa is now paying more money for a tractor. And that extra money is not going to his neighbor, the UAW worker in Ottumwa. It's leaving the community. It's leaving the state. It's going south of the border. All because of a chaotic, unpredictable policy that was sold as America First. This isn't just an economic loss. It's a loss of identity. It's a loss of pride. It's the hollowing out of the very rural economy that these policies claim to protect. Conclusion in the resonance point. The greatest casualty of the U.S.-China trade war was not a rival in Beijing. It was the American small town. The story of John Deere and Ottumwa is the perfect, painful example. It shows that in our complex modern world, good intentions are not enough. It shows that you cannot create stability by waging a war of chaos. Washington, in its effort to get tough, created a toxic level of policy uncertainty, and American icons like John Deere were forced to flee. Not because they are unpatriotic, but because they were searching for the one thing their own government could not provide: stability. This is not a spreadsheet. This is your reality. This is the story of one company in one town. But I know it's not the only one. Are you seeing this in your town? Are local suppliers, dealerships, or factories facing similar impossible choices? I want to hear what the real cost of this policy uncertainty has been for your community. Share your story below. This move by John Deere is a direct consequence of policy uncertainty, but it's also part of a much bigger, global story. It shows that the real power in the 21st century isn't just tariffs, it's the entire global supply chain. To understand why companies are still trapped in China's orbit, even when they try to leave, watch our next analysis, the ecosystem trap, why the U.S. can't escape China's gravity. Click here to watch it.